A deadly ambush that unfolded not over days or weeks, but in minutes. Minutes that left Israeli soldiers dead on a contested border. Minutes that shattered a fragile understanding between two enemies. Minutes that brought the entire northern front to the edge of full-scale war. What Hezbollah did today crossed a line that Jerusalem had warned, publicly, privately, and through every back channel available, would not hold. And when that line broke, Israel did not hesitate. They responded with speed, with overwhelming force, and with a precision that tells us this was not improvised. This was planned. This was waiting. And Hezbollah just gave them the reason to unleash it. For weeks now, there had been signals, not from official statements, not from formal diplomatic channels, just signals, that Hezbollah was preparing something provocative, something designed to test Israel's tolerance in ways it hadn't been tested in years. Hezbollah has been aggressive, yes, but they have been calculated in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a predictability, almost a choreography that both sides understood. Cross-border fire, drone incursions, anti-tank missiles aimed at military posts, each escalation carefully measured to stay just below the threshold of all-out war. But what set off alarm bells in Jerusalem and in Washington this week was that the rhythm went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Hezbollah's military infrastructure know the indicators well: the repositioning of Radwan Special Forces units closer to the border, the unusual movement of long-range missile components from deep storage, the activation of encrypted communication networks that had been dormant for months, the sudden disappearance of senior field commanders from their known locations. All of that went quiet. No movement, no chatter, no posturing. And whenever Hezbollah goes quiet, it means something is about to get very, very loud. Israeli Northern Command raised its alert status twice in the last 72 hours. Reserve units that had been on rotating leave were quietly recalled. Iron Dome batteries along the Lebanese border were repositioned and reinforced. Jerusalem knew something was coming. They just didn't know exactly when or exactly how deadly it would be. Early this morning, Israeli military intelligence detected what they described as coordinated hostile movement along 3 sectors of the northern border, including the activation of tunnel-adjacent staging areas that had not been operationally used in over 18 months. These are the kinds of assets that Hezbollah only deploys when they are signaling something very specific: a large-scale provocation, a strategic test of Israeli defenses, or a direct military engagement designed to inflict casualties. Israeli observers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all 3 at once. But what they did know was that Hezbollah was changing its operational posture. And when a military organization with over 150,000 rockets, battle-hardened fighters from the Syrian civil war, and direct Iranian funding shifts its posture without explanation, even by a small degree, every intelligence agency in the region pays attention. Within hours, the ambush was executed. A Hezbollah unit, believed to be elements of the Radwan Force operating under direct orders from Beirut, struck an IDF patrol near the border in a coordinated attack using anti-tank guided missiles, improvised explosive devices, and small arms fire from concealed positions. The attack was sophisticated, it was layered, and it was designed to kill. Israeli soldiers were hit. Casualties were confirmed. And for the first time in a very long time, Hezbollah had drawn Israeli blood in a deliberate, premeditated military operation. The warning issued by Jerusalem tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Senior official after emergency cabinet meeting described Hezbollah's ambush as unprovoked, calculated, and perhaps most importantly, an act of war that demands a response proportional not to the attack itself, but to the intent behind it. But ambushes only work if the target hesitates. Israel did not. In fact, their response today was among the most rapid and devastating military retaliations we've seen along the Lebanese border since the 2006 war. Here's what we know. Within 45 minutes of the ambush being confirmed, the Israeli Air Force launched a massive wave of airstrikes deep into southern Lebanon and into the Bekaa Valley. These weren't the limited, targeted strikes we've grown accustomed to seeing. These were full-spectrum combat operations: F-35I, Adir stealth fighters, precision-guided munitions, and electronic warfare platforms that Israel only deploys when they are preparing to dismantle an entire operational network. Simultaneously, Israeli artillery units along the northern border opened fire on over 60 pre-identified Hezbollah positions. Naval vessels repositioned off the Lebanese coast. and Israel's cyber warfare division reportedly launched operations against Hezbollah's communication infrastructure. This was not a proportional response. This was a message. Tonight, the IDF confirmed that Israeli forces launched coordinated strikes on over 120 Hezbollah targets, including a command and control facility in southern Beirut's Daye district that had recently been reactivated for what analysts believe was the operational planning hub for today's ambush. Israel struck before Hezbollah could disperse its assets or relocate its commanders. They hit weapons storage facilities buried beneath residential buildings. They hit communication relay towers that form the backbone of Hezbollah's encrypted network. They hit staging areas and logistics depots that were likely preparing to support follow-up attacks in the days ahead. In other words, Israel targeted the entire kill chain, and not just the fighters who pulled the trigger, but the infrastructure that aimed, loaded, and pointed the weapon. The command structure that would have made further attacks operational. This is what made Jerusalem's warning so urgent. Hezbollah's ambush wasn't just a provocation. It was actionable intelligence about a broader campaign. It represented the kind of escalation that could spiral into a regional war if left unchecked. And Israel, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't carpet bomb civilian areas. They didn't issue ultimatums without follow-through. They hit the nerve centers. They hit the supply lines. They hit the decision makers, and they did it within hours, not days, sending a clear signal that the rules of engagement along the northern border have fundamentally changed. And here's where the story becomes even more alarming. Western intelligence agencies now believe that Hezbollah's ambush was designed to test the cohesion of Israel's military response after months of draining operations in Gaza, internal political divisions, and growing international pressure. Hezbollah wanted to see whether Israel would absorb the blow and negotiate, respond with token strikes, or fracture under the weight of fighting on two fronts simultaneously, but instead the opposite happened. Israel didn't fracture. Israel didn't hesitate. They delivered a military response that was so swift, so comprehensive, that even Hezbollah's leadership in Beirut noticed. You don't get Hezbollah's attention easily. This is an organization that survived the 2006 war, fought through the Syrian civil war, and has spent decades building one of the most formidable non-state military forces on earth. But today, Israel got their attention. Defense analysts speaking with international media under anonymity described Hezbollah's shift as a strategic probing operation, a way to map Israel's response time, gauge their intelligence penetration, and test whether domestic fatigue had degraded their operational readiness. But Israel proved today that they remain both willing and capable. Their strikes were not only accurate, they were sequenced so precisely that Hezbollah commanders in the Bekaa Valley were reportedly hit while still receiving reports about the initial strikes in the south. That sequencing matters because it shows real-time intelligence dominance. It shows that Israel is not passively waiting for Hezbollah to dictate the tempo. They are actively shaping the battlefield, forcing Hezbollah to react rather than act. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of Israel's response. Israeli Air Force jets carried out over 200 sorties in a 12-hour period, forcing Hezbollah fighters to abandon forward positions along the entire border. Israeli Special Operations Forces targeted a Radwan Force tunnel entrance that had been under active construction in the last 6 months, collapsing a critical section of Hezbollah's cross-border infiltration network. Israeli naval vessels operating off the Lebanese coast reportedly intercepted and destroyed a small craft suspected of being used by Hezbollah to resupply coastal positions with Iranian-supplied weaponry. This wasn't just retaliation. This wasn't just defense. This was escalation dominance. This was deterrence restoration. And deterrence restoration is the one thing Hezbollah has struggled to prevent since Israel began systematically dismantling their forward infrastructure. For every advance Hezbollah has made, every tunnel dug, every missile positioned, every fighter trained, Israel has countered with something that renders the investment strategically meaningless. Remember, Hezbollah thought Israel was too distracted by Gaza to respond forcefully in the north. They thought months of reserve duty rotations, public protests, and coalition infighting had weakened the IDF's operational edge. They thought the international community's growing criticism of Israeli military operations would restrain Jerusalem from launching large-scale strikes in Lebanon. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Israel's military is operating with a unity of purpose that transcends domestic politics. The international community, while urging restraint, has acknowledged Israel's right to self-defense after a deliberate ambush. And Hezbollah's forward positions are burning. What makes this moment so dangerous and so consequential is that Hezbollah's ambush happened at a time when Hassan Nasrallah's successors and the organization's senior leadership are under extraordinary internal pressure. Iranian hardliners want visible confrontation with Israel to justify continued funding. Hezbollah's political wing wants to maintain domestic legitimacy in a crumbling Lebanese state. Field commanders want to demonstrate that their forces remain combat-ready and relevant, and Tehran wants to signal to Washington that its proxy network can still inflict costs. Hezbollah's leadership is balancing these demands while managing an organization that has lost key commanders, suffered devastating intelligence penetrations, and watched its reputation for invincibility erode with every Israeli strike. And when leaders in that position make sudden, aggressive moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. And vulnerability in this context makes them more dangerous, not less. Jerusalem's final warning, now transmitted through diplomatic and military channels, was designed to signal that Israel is not willing to allow the northern border to become a second front of attrition. Israeli officials said plainly that Hezbollah's ambush was inconsistent with any framework of deterrence or mutual restraint. That is diplomatic language for, "You just started something we intend to finish." You don't usually hear that tone from Jerusalem unless something serious is at stake. Something beyond a single engagement, beyond a single border skirmish. This is about the architecture of regional security. And Israel just put Hezbollah on notice that the architecture is being rebuilt with or without their cooperation. Meanwhile, Israel's prime minister addressed the nation in a firm, measured speech tonight. He said, "Those who attack our soldiers will pay a price that no one, no faction, no state, no sponsor can afford." He said, "We did not seek this escalation, but we will not shy from it." And he said, "Let this night serve as proof that Israel's capacity to defend itself has no ceiling, and our willingness to use that capacity has no hesitation." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a nation that understands just how high the stakes have become and how narrow the margin for miscalculation truly is. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Hezbollah's ambush wasn't isolated. Along with the border attack, Iranian-backed militias in Syria also launched rocket fire toward Israeli positions in the Golan Heights. Houthi forces in Yemen fired another ballistic missile toward the Red Sea, targeting commercial shipping linked to Israeli trade routes, and Iraqi militia groups increased drone operations targeting U.S. forces in the region, presumably to distract Washington from supporting Israel's northern response. All of this happened within the same 48-hour window. When Hezbollah moves multiple pieces at once across multiple theaters, it means something larger is underway, something coordinated from Tehran, something designed to stretch Israel's resources and test the limits of American patience. Western intelligence analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Hezbollah is preparing a sustained escalation campaign, a series of provocations designed to drag Israel into a prolonged northern conflict while Gaza remains unresolved. Another is that Hezbollah is attempting to renegotiate the terms of deterrence, using violence to force diplomatic concessions and a broader ceasefire framework. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Hezbollah is attempting to establish a new normal in which regular attacks on Israeli forces are tolerated, slowly eroding Israel's security posture along the border. But today, Israel took that card off the table. They didn't issue a statement and wait. They didn't defer to international mediators. They didn't respond with measured symbolic strikes. They hit Hezbollah so hard across so many targets in so many locations that the organization will spend weeks assessing the damage. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. Hezbollah wants to see whether Israel can sustain this level of response across multiple fronts simultaneously. Israel wants to show that its military dominance is not theoretical. It is operational, immediate, and overwhelming. Washington wants to prevent a regional war that could draw in American forces, and Tehran wants to prevent the total collapse of its most valuable proxy without losing face. Every actor in this equation is calculating. Every move carries consequences. And tonight, the calculations just got much more dangerous. Tonight, we've heard from military sources who are now monitoring Hezbollah's response in real time. They say Hezbollah's communication networks in southern Lebanon have gone largely dark, whether from Israeli cyber operations or deliberate shutdown remains unclear. They say Radwan Force units that were positioned near the border have pulled back to secondary positions, suggesting the scale of Israel's retaliation exceeded Hezbollah's contingency planning, And they say Hezbollah's decision to launch today's ambush is likely part of a broader Iranian strategy intended to apply multi-front pressure on Israel during a period of perceived strategic vulnerability. But Israel is not buckling under that pressure. In fact, Israel is leaning into it. Their response today, lethal, precise, and unrelenting, sent a message to Hezbollah that the cost of aggression will always exceed the benefit. And it sent a message to the world that Israel's final warning is exactly that, final. As the night goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Hezbollah hoped to achieve with today's ambush. But what we do know is that Jerusalem's response was timely. It neutralized an immediate threat before it could expand. It degraded Hezbollah's operational capacity across multiple sectors, and it restored a deterrent posture that Hezbollah had been methodically trying to erode. What happens next will depend on what Hezbollah does in the next 72 hours. If they pull back and reassess, this moment will be remembered as the day deterrence was restored. If they escalate further, Israel and its allies have already shown they are prepared for every contingency. They have shown they are ready to respond, but with everything they have. And tonight, for the first time in months, Hezbollah appears to be recalculating. Southern Lebanon is quiet, too quiet. And when Hezbollah is quiet, it means they are thinking. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, Hezbollah learned something they have been taught before, but chose to forget, that Israel's patience has limits, that Israel's reach has no limits, and that Israel's willingness to defend its people is absolute. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Jerusalem's final warning was not a bluff. The IDF's retaliation was not symbolic. And the next move belongs to Hezbollah. But the consequences belong to everyone. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.